Just 2 decades ago, Los Angeles was the ultimate American dream destination, a sprawling metropolis where millions of people arrived with nothing but ambition and left with fortunes, where every boulevard told a story of transformation and every skyline promised infinite possibility. Today, those same boulevards tell a completely different story. One of silent abandonment, shattered dreams, and a city that is slowly emptying itself while the world watches without understanding why. How is it possible that one of the most iconic cities on the planet is losing residents at an alarming rate? What is really happening in the depths of this megacity that once seemed invincible? The answer is not found in official headlines or government statistics, because what is occurring in Los Angeles is something very few people dare to admit out loud. The City of Angels is on the brink of collapse, and the signs are everywhere for those willing to see them. But before you discover which sign is the most disturbing of all, you need to understand how we got here. Because this is not just the story of a city crumbling apart, this is the story of millions of people who have had to make the hardest decision of their lives: stay and sink with it, or leave before it is too late. For entire generations, Los Angeles was synonymous with infinite opportunity. It was the place where young people arrived from every corner of America and the world with a suitcase full of dreams and nearly empty pockets, convinced that here they could build something extraordinary. Families crammed into tiny apartments because the sacrifice was worth it. Your children would have better schools, you would have a better job, and everyone would have access to a world of possibilities that simply did not exist anywhere else. The city absorbed everyone regardless of where they came from. The farmers' markets overflowed with life from dawn until well into the night. The restaurants on Sunset Strip never closed because there was always someone celebrating something. The freeways transported millions of souls every day in a chaotic but functional ballet. Each neighborhood had its own distinct personality. Venice Beach was bohemian and artistic. Beverly Hills was elegant and glamorous. Downtown was gritty but authentic. There was a palpable energy in the air, that unmistakable feeling that you were at the center of the American universe. On Sundays, families filled Griffith Park as if it were their second home. Young professionals worked late in the towers of Century City, dreaming of promotions and bonuses. Entrepreneurs opened businesses on every corner, betting everything that Los Angeles would keep growing eternally. And for decades, that bet seemed safe. The city did not just grow, it exploded in all directions, like a living organism that knew no limits. But every organism has a breaking point, and Los Angeles was about to discover its own in the most brutal way possible. The first sign that something was terribly wrong arrived in a form nobody expected: silence. Not absolute silence, but something far more unsettling. A gradual diminishment of the vital noise that defines any great city. Neighbors who had lived 30 years in the same building began to notice that apartments around them no longer filled when someone moved out. Windows remained dark week after week. Mailboxes filled with advertisements that nobody collected. In entire neighborhoods that once boiled with children's activity, playgrounds sat empty even on sunny weekends. Elementary schools that used to have years-long waiting lists now begged for students. Grocery stores closed locations not because they were unprofitable, but because there literally were not enough customers left to justify keeping them open. And most disturbing of all, nobody talked openly about this. It was as if there existed a tacit agreement not to mention the elephant in the room, not to admit that the city was slowly emptying like a burning building from which people flee silently to avoid causing panic. Official data showed a small population decline that authorities attributed to normal demographic trends, but anyone who walked the streets with open eyes could feel it. This was not normal. Something fundamental had changed in the relationship between Los Angeles and its inhabitants. The implicit social contract that said if you work hard here, you will prosper, had been broken, and millions of people were drawing their own conclusions with their feet. The second sign came from below, literally. Los Angeles sits on top of geological fault lines that make it one of the most earthquake-prone regions in the world, but what most people do not realize is that the real threat is not just the big one that everyone fears, but the slow-motion disaster already unfolding beneath the surface. The city faces subsidence and ground instability issues that worsen every year due to groundwater extraction and the weight of endless development on unstable soil. Engineers have documented areas sinking measurably, creating cascading infrastructure failures. You walk through certain neighborhoods and see buildings with foundation cracks so severe they look like they might split in half. Streets buckle and warp, creating waves of asphalt that destroy car suspensions. Water mains and sewer lines break constantly because the ground shifts beneath them, creating massive leaks that waste millions of gallons while the city simultaneously faces chronic water scarcity. The Metropolitan Water District has had to implement increasingly severe restrictions because the Colorado River and Northern California sources that supply most of LA's water are drying up due to prolonged mega-drought conditions. And here is the terrifying part. This is not temporary. Climate models predict that the American Southwest is entering a period of aridification that could last decades or even centuries, transforming the region into something resembling a desert that simply cannot support tens of millions of people. When you are a parent and you see the cracks spreading in your home's foundation year after year, when you feel that the ground beneath your feet is no longer stable, when you realize you are living in a seismically active zone on top of depleting aquifers in a region running out of water, you do the only sensible thing. You leave. Because who would want to raise their children in a city that could literally crumble beneath them? But wait, because the third sign is even more disturbing and has to do with something we all take for granted until it disappears: water. Los Angeles faces a hydrological paradox that seems pulled from a dystopian nightmare. The city exists in a semi-arid climate that receives minimal rainfall, yet it supports nearly 4 million people in the city proper and over 13 million in the greater metropolitan area. This was only possible through massive engineering projects that brought water from hundreds of miles away, but those systems are now failing simultaneously. The California aqueduct system is delivering less water every year as the Sierra Nevada snowpack diminishes. Lake Mead and Lake Powell, the massive reservoirs that store Colorado River water, have dropped to levels so low that intake pipes are becoming exposed. Groundwater aquifers beneath the city have been pumped far beyond sustainable levels. And climate change is making everything worse. Droughts last longer, rain patterns become less predictable, and summer temperatures soar to levels that increase water demand precisely when supply is lowest. Wealthy neighborhoods install elaborate graywater recycling systems and drought-resistant landscaping while still maintaining green lawns. But working-class communities face water rationing that makes daily life a struggle. Residents in some areas receive notices that they can only water their yards on certain days or face heavy fines. Apartment complexes install restrictive flow limiters that turn showers into trickles. And the most disturbing part is that water agency officials quietly admit in closed-door meetings that they have no long-term solution. There is no magical new water source waiting to be tapped. Desalination plants are hideously expensive and energy-intensive. When you reach that point, when you realize that the most basic resource for human life is no longer guaranteed in your city, when you understand that your children might grow up in a megacity without reliable water, the decision to leave stops being an option and becomes a survival necessity. The fourth sign hits you directly in your family economy and manifests in something we all feel but few truly quantify: stolen time. Los Angeles has become a machine that devours human hours through its absolutely insane traffic. We are not talking about annoying congestion, but a systemic mobility collapse that turns every commute into an epic odyssey. The average Los Angeles resident spends between 3 and 4 hours daily traveling between home and work. Think about that for a moment. 4 hours each day, 20 hours each week, 80 hours per month, nearly 1,000 hours per year trapped inside a car or crammed into inadequate public transit. That is equivalent to 40 complete days of your life each year, more than an entire month, simply moving your body from point A to point B without producing anything, without enjoying anything, just existing in a limbo of frustration and stress. Major freeways turn into giant parking lots during rush hours. The 405 that should be a fast route crawls at walking speed. The 101 through the valley becomes a nightmarish gauntlet that can take 2 hours to traverse 20 miles. Public transit options remain woefully inadequate for a city this size. The metro system covers only a fraction of the sprawling metropolitan area, buses get stuck in the same traffic as cars, and the infrastructure is decades behind comparable cities. Accidents are so common, they do not even make the news unless they are especially horrific. And all this lost time has a cost that goes far beyond economics. It is time you do not spend with your children, time you do not invest in your personal development, time you do not enjoy with your partner, time simply stolen from your life and thrown into the void of urban chaos. Companies have started offering remote work not out of generosity, but because they know that asking someone to physically go to an office in Los Angeles is almost asking them to sacrifice their mental health. And more people are doing the math and arriving at the same conclusion. It is not worth it. No salary, however generous, compensates for literally losing months of your life every year trapped in the traffic of a city that no longer functions. But perhaps the fifth sign is the most insidious of all, because it attacks something you cannot see but definitely feel: the air you breathe. Los Angeles has some of the worst air quality in the United States, despite decades of regulations and improvements. The combination of millions of vehicles, port emissions from Long Beach and Los Angeles harbors, and geography that traps pollution in the basin creates a toxic atmospheric soup. There are days, literally entire days, when air quality reaches hazardous levels and authorities have to warn vulnerable populations to stay indoors because outdoor air is poisonous. Children develop asthma at alarming rates. Chronic respiratory diseases have skyrocketed. Lung cancer cases in non-smokers have increased dramatically, and the scariest part is that many of these effects are cumulative and irreversible. Every day you breathe that air, you are shortening your life expectancy in measurable and quantifiable ways. Studies show that living in Los Angeles long-term can reduce your lifespan by several years compared to living in areas with clean air. The sky is rarely the brilliant blue you see in promotional photos, but instead a hazy brown-gray mixture of suspended particles that reduces visibility and coats everything with a toxic film. The mountains that ring the basin, and should be visible every day, disappear behind a curtain of smog for weeks at a time. And when you are a parent and you watch your kids run in the park, and you know that with every breath they are inhaling a cocktail of nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, ground-level ozone, and volatile organic compounds, when you understand that you are literally poisoning your children just by the act of living in this city, something breaks inside you. Families with resources start seriously considering moving, not out of ambition or adventure, but out of pure biological survival. Because what is the point of working hard to give your kids a good future if that future includes chronic respiratory illness and reduced life expectancy? The sixth sign is so obvious it becomes invisible: normalized violence. Los Angeles and its metropolitan area have experienced a sustained increase in crime that has completely transformed the daily experience of living here. We are not just talking about big headlines about gang violence and cartel activity, but something far more insidious: common crime that affects you directly almost every day. Car break-ins are so frequent that people no longer even report them. Home burglaries occur in broad daylight in neighborhoods that were once considered safe. Carjackings, where armed criminals force you out of your vehicle at gunpoint, have become routine. Women cannot walk alone at night in most neighborhoods without risking assault. Children can no longer play unsupervised in the streets like their parents did because the risk is too high. Organized retail theft rings operate with near impunity, looting stores in coordinated smash-and-grab attacks while overwhelmed police forces struggle to respond. Families install bars on all windows, security cameras, alarm systems, hire private security patrols, all to create an illusion of safety in a city where the state has clearly lost control. And the worst part is not just the violence itself, but the normalization, the fact that we have all accepted this as the inevitable price of living here. You exchange stories of break-ins with your coworkers as if you were commenting on the weather. You take it for granted that you will be victimized eventually and just hope it is not violent. You learn not to leave anything visible in your car, not to wear expensive jewelry, to always walk alert, looking over your shoulder. This is no way to live. This is existing in a constant low-level state of fear that erodes your quality of life day after day, until one day you wake up and realize you have spent years living as if you were in a low-intensity war zone. And when you have the option to live somewhere else where you do not have to feel that constant anxiety, where your kids can ride bikes without you fearing for their safety, why the hell would you stay? The seventh sign hits where it hurts most, in your wallet. Los Angeles has become prohibitively expensive for most of its residents. Housing costs have exploded in ways that have no relationship to actual wages. Tiny apartments in decent neighborhoods cost fortunes that only foreigners and the local elite can afford. Developers build luxury towers that remain half-empty because they are aimed at an international real estate investment market, not people who actually want to live here. Meanwhile, rents have doubled or tripled in just 5 years, leaving entire families on the street because they simply can no longer pay. Gentrification has transformed traditional neighborhoods into theme parks for tourists and tech workers, where original inhabitants can no longer afford even a coffee at what used to be their corner cafe. And it is not just housing. Everything has become disproportionately expensive. Basic services, transportation, food, private education, which is necessary because public schools have deteriorated, private health care, which is necessary because public options are overwhelmed, bottled water because tap water tastes terrible, and infrastructure is aging, it all adds up in an inflationary spiral that makes simply surviving in Los Angeles require resources most people do not have. And here is the cruel paradox. The city that supposedly offers the best salaries also has the highest cost of living. So your real purchasing power is frequently lower than if you lived in a smaller city with a nominally lower salary but much lower expenses. More and more young professionals do these calculations and realize they can have better quality of life, save more money, and live in better conditions in mid-sized cities like Austin, Nashville, or Phoenix than struggling to survive in Los Angeles. The economic equation simply no longer closes, and people are voting with their feet. The eighth sign is perhaps the most emotionally devastating: the loss of identity and community. Los Angeles used to be a collection of distinct neighborhoods where people knew their neighbors, where there existed a genuine sense of community and belonging. Families lived for generations on the same street. Kids grew up playing with the children of the same families their parents grew up with. There was collective memory, shared traditions, a sense of historical continuity. All of that is disintegrating before our eyes. The city has become transactional and anonymous. People no longer stay. They just pass through temporarily before moving on. Neighbors change so fast you do not even bother learning their names. Traditional neighborhood festivals have disappeared because there are not enough people left with roots to organize them. Family-owned businesses that operated for decades closed to be replaced by generic franchises that could be anywhere in the world. The city loses its distinctive character, its soul, that thing that made it unique and irreplaceable. And when you no longer feel you belong to a place, when there no longer exists that network of relationships and shared memory that emotionally binds you to a territory, leaving becomes much easier. You are no longer abandoning your home, you are just leaving a place where you happen to live. This erosion of social fabric is perhaps the deepest damage and hardest to repair, because rebuilding community requires generations, while destroying it can happen in just a few years. And Los Angeles is in the final stages of that destruction. And now we arrive at the ninth and most terrifying sign of all, the one that confirms this is not just a temporary crisis, but a systemic collapse. The government has stopped functioning in any meaningful way. The institutions that should protect, serve, and plan for the common good have become bureaucratic shells, obsessed with short-term political survival and completely incapable of confronting the monumental challenges facing the city. There is no real plan to solve the water crisis. There is no effective strategy to address homelessness, which has exploded to catastrophic levels, with tent encampments lining entire boulevards. There are no serious mobility policies. There is insufficient investment in critical infrastructure. There is no genuine combat against the corruption that rots every project from within. Politicians succeed each other in office, promising radical transformations and delivering barely superficial cosmetics. Resources are diverted, contracts are inflated, projects remain incomplete. And meanwhile, the city crumbles literally and figuratively. Citizens have completely lost faith that authorities can or want to solve anything. Nobody expects the government to fix the traffic problem, or guarantee clean water, or make streets safe, or address the homelessness catastrophe. People simply assume they are on their own, that they have to solve their own problems, that the basic social contract between citizens and state has been irreparably broken. And when you reach that point of total civic despair, when you viscerally understand that nobody is coming to save you, that the city will not improve but only worsen, that you are basically on your own facing all these simultaneous challenges without any real institutional support, then leaving stops being a dramatic option and becomes the only logical and responsible decision you can make, especially if you have children whose future depends on your decisions today. So here we stand on the rubble of what was once the entertainment capital of the world, the city where dreams came true, watching as millions of people make the same silent decision: leave. Not with fanfare, not with dramatic declarations, but simply disconnecting their lives from this place and reconnecting them anywhere else that offers what Los Angeles can no longer provide: basic safety, clean water, breathable air, functional mobility, affordable housing, a future for children. Official statistics barely capture the magnitude of this exodus, because many people do not leave all at once, but gradually. First, they get remote work, then they spend more time elsewhere. Finally, they only return for occasional visits, until one day they realize they no longer really live here, even though they technically still have an address registered in the city. And those who remain are not necessarily the most loyal or brave, but frequently those who have no choice, those who are trapped by economic or family circumstances, those who do not have the resources or connections to start over somewhere else. Los Angeles is becoming a two-speed city. The very rich who can insulate themselves from all these problems in their fortified enclaves, and the very poor who have no escape. The middle class, that backbone of any functional society, is disappearing toward mid-sized cities that now offer better quality of life. But maybe there is still hope. Maybe this is just rock bottom, and from here the only possible direction is up. There are voices arguing that Los Angeles has faced crises before and always survived, that this city has an almost supernatural resilience, that Angelenos find ways to adapt to conditions that would destroy any other population. And perhaps they are right. Perhaps we are witnessing not the death of a city, but its painful transformation into something different, something potentially more sustainable. Perhaps depopulation will finally force authorities to make difficult decisions they have postponed for decades. Perhaps the water crisis will catalyze technological innovations and policy changes that eventually solve the problem. Perhaps the middle-class exodus will create enough political pressure to force real structural reforms. Perhaps Los Angeles will emerge from this dark period as a smaller, greener, more livable, more human city. Or perhaps not. Perhaps we are seeing the beginning of the end of one of the world's great cities, a slow agony that will take decades, but whose final result is inevitable. Perhaps in 50 years, Los Angeles will be remembered as a cautionary tale, an example of what happens when urban growth spirals completely out of control, when authorities ignore basic laws of hydrology and climate science, when short-term greed triumphs over long-term planning, when a society allows its iconic city to slowly disintegrate rather than making the necessary sacrifices to save it. Perhaps future generations will study the fall of Los Angeles in textbooks, the way we now study the collapse of Detroit or the decline of Rust Belt cities, wondering how the hell we let this happen. The truth is, nobody knows with certainty what the future holds for this dying city. The only certainty is that the Los Angeles that exists today is radically different from the one that existed 20 years ago, and the Los Angeles of 20 years from now will be radically different from today's. Millions of people no longer live here, even though their memories and hearts perhaps will always remain tied to these streets they once called home. Millions more are making that decision right now, packing their bags, physically or mentally, saying goodbye to a dream that promised so much and delivered so little. If you have felt any of these pressures yourself, if you recognize your own story in this narrative of urban disintegration, share your experience in the comments, because you are not alone in this. Millions are living exactly the same thing. And if this story has opened your eyes to a reality you maybe did not want to see, but needed to understand, subscribe, because the next story you need to hear might be about where all these people are moving and what cities are emerging as the new centers of opportunity while the old capitals crumble. The map is being redrawn before our eyes. The question is, will you stay to sync with the past, or will you move toward the uncertain but promising future?